Welcome to Into Theology. I am joined by Matthew Hoskin as our special guest for our Boethius series. Ian Clary cannot make it today. He's fulfilling his boyhood dream of making it to space. He's a passenger on a flight to the International Space Station. He'll be there for the next week, and he's finally become the astronaut that he's always dreamed that he could be. So his joy is actually our pleasure. His sort of beatitude, we might say, is our Felicitas.
If you will.
If I'm able to use that, so that we can jump back into Boethius with Matthew Hoskin, who has much more able capability in this literature than I do. I always kind of feel like when I'm reading Boethius that I'm a little bit of like an amateur pretending to know something. At the same time, maybe that's the best way to read Boethius, because he's writing for people to read.
It is. He is writing for normal people to read and understand, so...
I think so. I mean, it's not written... Like, sometimes they'll read it almost feels like it's written at the level of, like, Epictetus, like, to students, to people who can actually understand it. Whereas, I think some of the philosophical literature, when you get into, like Porphyry or whoever, Proclus or something like that, is not, like, accessible in the same way. So I never thought about that, but it is actually very accessible, so that's interesting. Now, we're in Consolation 2. And it seems like the topic is don't rely on fortune to make you happy, because fortune is, we might say, fickle. The wheel of fortune is fickle. And we... Wait for it.
Wait for it. For those of you watching the video,
there is the wheel of fortune. And you don't turn it around to win a few $100s if you guess letters. That one is just, it's a very unfortunate wheel in that sense. There was a passage that we talked about reading on page 195 of Consolation 2, which is roughly line 50, I don't know, depending on your edition. I guess it's just, is it just lines?
That's just lines of the Latin text of the Lobe.
So what is this? This is prose 4. So Consolation 2, prose 4. Page 195 and roughly line 58, depending on what edition you're reading. I think we're both using the Lobe, is that correct?
Yeah, we're both using the Lobe.
Yeah, we like our earlobes. And anyways, this is kind of interesting, almost like a summary of the big kind of point of the chapter, I thought here anyway. So I don't know if Matthew, you want to read that and we'll discuss it.
Yeah, for sure. A man who bears all with contentment finds every state a happy one. Who is so happy that once he gives in to discontent, he would not choose to change his condition? How many bitter troubles spoil with their spattering the sweetness of a man's happiness? A happiness which, even if it seem pleasant to a man when he enjoys it, yet cannot be prevented from passing when it will. So it is very clear how wretched is the happiness of mortal affairs, since it neither endures for the contented, nor altogether satisfies the uneasy. Why, then, do you mortals look outside for happiness, when it is really to be found within yourselves?
Ooh, this sounds like it could be from a Disney movie.
Happiness is found within.
It's just deep inside of you. And it sounds to me like Boethius is just saying how you feel is all that really matters. But it's not quite that.
It's not.
Not even close.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, he would be rejected by Walt Disney Inc. I thought this was like an interesting passage. Maybe you can give me your I'll give you kind of my summary take, and then you can maybe give a response to it. It's like, if you rely on fortune, if you rely on your circumstances to make you happy, then the changing circumstances will make you equally unhappy. So if you rely on money, you lose money, you're unhappy. If you rely on fame, you lose fame, you're unhappy. If you rely on comfort and you lose comfort, you're unhappy. If you rely on a particular job and you lose that job, you're unhappy. If you rely on getting this opportunity and you don't get this opportunity, you're unhappy. Whatever it is, like, you can just, everyone can fill in the blank. We all live in a world in which we assume that if we get what we want, we'll be happy. And yet, since the tiniest thing can topple your happiness, you could find your dream job and then some 25% tariff is declared on your country and that job is gone in a moment, and you have no control over that, really. And so if your happiness is placed on things that are as changeable as fortune, you're absolutely pooched. So you need to base your happiness on something completely different. And there's some hints about what he means by found within you. Maybe the third or fourth sentence after you started, he says things like, nothing is miserable unless you think so. Which seems to suggest that if your judgment about some fortunate thing is what makes you happy, then when you lose that, your judgment's the thing making you unhappy. Your judgment that you lost that thing. And then he says, on the other hand, the man who bears all with contentment finds every state a happy one. I'm kind of reminded of Paul, who says, I find contentment in all things, whether in much or in little, etc. And there's this sort of contentment that he's pointing to. Later, just to give one piece of context before you go, is like your internal, whatever, the thing that's found inside of you needs to align with reality, with the external world. So he's going to say, essentially, to be happy, your internal life has to align with the way things actually are. So it is not a subjective inward turn, as it sounds like to our modern ears. It's a more objective turn inward.
Yeah, I think that's all sort of spot on. It reminds me of a whole bunch of things. Yes, you've done it. But it does remind me of a whole bunch of things. So, for example, for those of you who care, which probably is like me, 100% of the people who care, the word for happiness that he's using here...
Will your wife listen to this, do you think? She might care.
Actually, she also has a classics degree, so you're right.
We got at least 2 then.
There we go.
I'm going to care, so there'll be 3 of us.
Hey, that's 3 of us. Felicitas is the word for happiness that he's using here. Elsewhere, he uses the word beatitudo, which I've discovered in this translation has also sometimes rendered as happiness. So it's it's a fun game for me to play as I read it, to look at the Latin, because I'm speeding through the English and checking the Latin when I care. Because this is like my second time reading it in like 3 months. So what he's talking about Felicitas, and that word also, its adjective is felix, right? Like Felix the cat, which can also mean lucky. Right? So it's not... By the way,
that show freaked me out as a kid. Felix the Cat. The absurdity of it, but I imagine being in that world, terrified me.
Oh, nobody wants to be in that world. But yeah, so lucky, right? It's about being lucky, and everyone knows that lucky people, your luck can run out, right? That at any time, if you're having, like, you see TV shows, right? This is the premise of any movie about gambling, somebody's lucky streak is going to end at some point, right? Or someone's luck is going to suddenly change and he's going to be doing well at the tables. Right? If you watch any film or any TV show about gambling, I don't recommend gambling, but that's the thing that comes to mind when we think about luck, is how lucky are you? And someone's luck eventually does run out, right? Luck is like fortune in this sense. So that's one of the things for us to think about. This kind of happiness, the word that he's using in Latin, is one that is already weighted with this idea of the impermanence and instability of what it actually means to be happy, right? And so you need to find something that isn't changeable. And I would say that, although, he does say you need to find happiness, real happiness, inside yourselves, he doesn't necessarily mean good mental health, although I'm sure that's a good thing. I don't think Boethius would be against good mental health, but I think you can find the kind of beatitude he's talking about even in the midst of a mental health crisis, or in the midst of, you wake up, like everyone wakes up, you're just on the wrong side of the bed that day or whatever, right? And so obviously your happiness isn't coming from within yourself in that sense, because you have bad feelings that day. And so in fact it is aligning that internal self, even if you don't have a mental illness, but you're just blue. You look to the realities beyond you that you can align your internal self with, like, oh look, God is in heaven ordering all things according to right. I have a loving wife and children and clothing and food and a roof over my head. All of these earthly blessings, which could be taken away at any moment, which is why you need to look beyond even those, and then you can have that happiness within.
Mm-hmm.
I have a forthcoming chapter in a book about Tolkien and Boethius. And so there are 2 guys that I talk about in that who relate to this finding happiness within yourself or not. And they are King Theoden and Denethor, because both of them go through a period of despair.
Right.
And Gandalf is capable of helping Theoden. Actually, it's not, for those of you who have only seen the films, Theoden is broken from the so-called spell, which is not a magic spell cast by Saruman at all, simply by the words of truth that Gandalf speaks to him. Gandalf speaks to him truths that have been hidden from him or that he has forgotten. And he is handed a sword With the famous line, like, perhaps if you held a sword, you would feel your strength again. And is when he takes the sword that Theoden sort of, you can see his vigor and his strength renewed. Not because he has an angel casting a magic spell on him, but because he actually already has that, and he has forgotten it. And so none of the circumstances of Rohan have changed, but the king's disposition has changed. And so he is able to ride in the valiant last ride of the Rohirrim that, like, makes me weep, right, in its glory. And he's able to do it with this sort of cheer because he has within himself the reserves of knowing what is right and what is true, aligned with reality. Whereas
Make me
Denethor,
think we should do like a Lord of the Rings into theology series.
Into theology and the Lord of the Rings.
Well, there's a book on like the theology of Tolkien or something that I
think my friend Austin did Tolkien Dogmatics.
Yeah, that's
which
the
came
book.
Out, yeah. So that's Austin Freeman, Tolkien Dogmatics from Lexham Press. For those who care to go find it, it's a good book. I liked it. And then we come to contrast. He's actually the editor of the book my chapter's coming out in.
Cool.
And so then the contrast, that was Denethor, who is so filled with despair. Gandalf even says, "There's nothing I can do for those who despair." Right, and ends up almost killing Faramir and suiciding because he doesn't, because he has been deceived. He actually is not aligned with reality. The reality is that Iluvatar is still there, ordering all things to his own purpose.
Right.
And so even if you were to lose the War of the Ring, hope could still persevere, but it's not, defeat is not guaranteed. He believes it is. Right.
And despair just is kind of the contrary of hope in the sort of traditional setting. So it's like despairing is actually sinful, interestingly enough, in Christian theology. We often talk about despair as like something you should empathize with, but you probably shouldn't empathize with sin. Hope is the healing balm of despair. Sorry, that was a bit of an aside.
Well, that's fine. That's actually, despair is in the draft where I had to cut a bunch of irrelevant, well, not irrelevant, points that have nothing to do with either Tolkien or Boethius. I do talk about despair in the Christian tradition and Evagrius, and it's one of the original 7 deadly sins when there were 8 of them.
Yeah, I thought it was. It's funny. I was thinking about this earlier today. And I used ChatGPT, and I was looking at the 7 deadly sins. I'm like, it's one of the 7 deadly sins, and ChatGPT said it was. And I was like, wait, I'm sure it is, but it's because of Evagrius, because I was been reading him. And I was like, my brain was like broken. I was like, well, I guess I was wrong. But you vindicated my memory. Thank you.
I've vindicated your memory, and I'm really happy to take one to have a hit on ChatGPT at any time in my life. But yeah,
it's not, it's been useful sometimes, but there was something else I used it for, and it was just, I was looking at the lyrics of Cool from the 1961 film West Side Story, and I was asking who the singer was, and they said it was Action, but it's actually Ice in the film, even though in the Broadway play it's Riff, but it's Ice, anyway, sorry, and I thought it was Ice, and I told my 5-year-old son it was Ice. And then ChatGPT said it was Action, and I was like, really? I guess I was wrong. And then I looked up further. So ChatGPT has been it's been kind of hit or miss for me of late.
Yeah, it tends to hallucinate. But yeah, despair is what Boethius is entering into at the beginning of the book, right? This is what the book is the antidote to. This is what the consolation is to cure him of. It is to help him align his internal self with the external realities about God's providence in the world, and about, well, where is true beatitude meant to be found? And it is not to be found in whatever it is that fortune brings.
No. It is utterly fascinating, though, the way that he describes the problem that if you rely on essentially chance, like things that can be taken away, you'll never be happy. Like how obvious that point is, and yet how impossible it is to live that way. Like all of us think if you had a bit more money, if you could put a down payment on a house in Ontario, in like Toronto, you'd finally be happy. Like all these kinds of things, and then you're not, or you do for a time and it gets taken away. And I can't remember the book, but there's a line in this book that luxury spoils everything. And the idea is that once you experienced something a little bit better, everything else seems worse by comparison afterwards. I remember in college I lived on a mat in a basement on a floor with a suitcase. And it was my best life ever. Whereas now I'd probably say it was kind of a low bar of satisfaction. But that's because, you get married and you have like now a mattress on a bed. It's insane.
Yeah.
But even the tiniest thing can topple the most fortunate from the summit of their happiness, Boethius says. So to look inside is going to mean much more than anything else. He has another line too. If you go to the next page on page 197, it's a bit more philosophically put. He goes on to say, near the top of the page, now to see the happiness cannot consist in the fortuitous things of this mortal life. Look at it in this way. Is this actually Lady Wisdom talking right now?
Yeah, this is still her.
Okay. If happiness is the highest good of a rational creature, which is just a human being, and that cannot be the highest good which can in any way be taken away, because clearly that which can be taken away is higher, or cannot be taken away is higher, then surely the instability of fortune cannot aspire to the attainment of happiness. In other words, if the thing that you value can be taken away, it can't be the highest good. But if you value something that can't be taken away, it's obviously better. Again, he who is born up on this fallible happiness must either know or not know that it is changeable. If your reputation can be good and then you get falsely accused the next week, it's changeable. If he does not know, can his state truly be a happy one in such blind ignorance? If he does know, he must fear that he may lose that which he knows can be lost, and his continual fear will prevent him from being happy. Everybody who buys a sports car knows when you go to a parking lot that you're in continual fear of getting it dinged up, and that fear then kind of spoils the happiness of your Ferrari, we might say.
That's why you park across the line so you take up 2 spots.
I know, that's what annoys me. Oh my goodness. Yeah, whenever you see a nice car like double parked, you're just like, give me a break, buddy. But at the same time, I think it's pretty, like, you know, the more things that you have, the more you fear to lose them. So the more wealth you have, the more property you have, the more books you have or whatever. You're like, oh no, what happens at a flood or whatever. So there is something about that. So you need something unchangeable to satisfy you. And it strikes me that there are some hints of Augustine even here, even if he's not on the surface. It feels very Augustinian anyways, this book, although maybe they just because they live in the same world.
It feels like Augustine, because Augustine gets into these sorts of things in City of God as well, where he talks about what is true happiness. So I often feel like Boethius in a lot of points is a distillation of Augustine's City of God for the individual.
Oh, interesting.
In a lot of points, whereas I know where City of God is this huge thing for a whole civilization.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before, but that actually makes sense to me. I've never thought about it that way, so I'd have to really just like piece that together a little bit more. There was one piece I wanted to add, and we were talking about this. A lot of people, and myself included, have kind of just said like Boethius is a Stoic or whatever, but he's not really a Stoic. I mean, not in any obvious way in terms of Stoic philosophy or theology or whatever. It's only in the very like unsophisticated like manosphere way that he's a Stoic. He is stoical in the sense of he has some themes that overlap with Stoic philosophy, but does that make you a Stoic, or does that make you a man who lived with contemporaries who thought similarly to Stoicism? And one of the ways that he kind of contrasts Stoicism, well, one is in his view of Providence. He's going to talk about how love binds everything. We can maybe finish on that. But two, in the way that he talks about his family. So Epictetus in his discourses, or is it the handbook? Wherever. One of his students notes from his, basically Epictetus was a teacher in Italy, right? And his students took notes of his classes. And I remember at one point, or I know at one point, where he talks about, well, when you have your family, you need to have this kind of measured apathy towards them so that you can attain this, what is the word? I think it's like ataxia or something like this, the sort of...
Yeah, I think it is.
Unable to be disturbed. And you treat them like a human being. So that while you do love them and you're going to be attached to them, you kind of almost push them away from your heart's heart. And you do that so essentially if they die, you're not broken. There's some kind of practical wisdom where you don't put all your eggs in one basket in life, I suppose. But Boethius, I actually think, and I don't know this, I think because he's a Christian, in part, is really not going to be able to go for such a view. And at one point, Lady Wisdom herself, so this is Wisdom speaking, I'm just looking for the passage, it says it in about 2 places.
Prose 4, page 191, where she lists off every member of his family still being around.
Yep, that's right. Father-in-law Symmachus, a wife who excels in modesty, your sons who are both consuls, and they all love you. And so basically, relationships, family, these are good. He's not, trying to ignore all of those things. Oh, and there's one thing I wanted to bring up before Hannah, back to you're mentioning. I can't remember exactly what you're saying when you think it's about Lord of the Rings or whatever, but there's an interesting piece of the puzzle that my brain connected was like, is Boethius actually speaking against Epicureanism insofar as the avoidance of pain is not the highest pleasure possible? There was something he said about that. Anyways, I already forgot, but there was something he said about that. It was essentially like, that's again kind of almost fortune. You can't avoid a pain to achieve pleasure, which is essentially a form of similar to Stoicism, where he's just unperturbed, and that's the highest goal. But that's an earthly good that can be disturbed by, it's right. I'm reading the Odyssey right now, probably very unwisely to my 5-year-old, but it's fun.
That's fine.
I can't wait for the last chapter when we get the father-son bonding time, when
father-son bonding time.
Odysseus and
a little
Telemachus
slaughter
come back
together.
and slaughter their enemies together.
Here we go, boy.
But it is what it is. But just the how Odysseus has all these worldly goods and all this kind of stuff, but like he can't protect them. There's just no way. He talks about how he enjoyed avoiding all this pain when he was with Calypso, I think for 7 years, but he was not overjoyed because he wanted to go home to his wife Penelope and in their home, even though he avoided all the sorts of pains of life and had I think daily baths and the food of the gods and all this kind of stuff. Sorry, that was a little bit off topic, but
but you can see
went there.
Your brain went there, and it's not a bad place to go, just simply because if we want to understand the way ancient Christians with a classical education are reading, Boethius, I think, has Homer quotes in different places, right? And the Greek fathers quote Homer. Not, obviously, he's Homer, he's a pagan
Homer
poet.
Simpson?
So Homer the poet who wrote the Odyssey.
Oh, okay, sorry, I got confused.
Good call. Yeah. But like the fathers are quoting Homer, or Latin guys like Boethius and Augustine are quoting Virgil and stuff, despite the fact that they'll express distaste for poetry. These are the two poets that these guys are continually using, and they're using them for philosophical purposes, using them for, even the pagans have a glimpse of theology in the best of their poetry, right? And so I think it's totally acceptable to look at the Odyssey and see the ways in which, even there with Homer, it's this connection to family with Odysseus that actually breaks the Epicurean lie, right? And Virgil himself, I would argue, is more Stoic than Epicurean as well.
I didn't think about that. You're right. Especially, the book ends essentially him going home to Penelope. It's like the thing. And that would end his homeland, which would tell you that Epicurean, their form of happiness, it's essentially avoiding pain or things. Well, actually being content with what you have, so you don't always have to seek pleasure to avoid pain. It's a bit more complicated.
Yeah,
but
it's more complicated than simply avoiding pain, yeah. But I would say, yeah.
Because recently the idea of finding positive happiness in your family is sort of, that's not Epicurean, yeah.
That's not Epicurean at all.
Or Stoic,
no.
Actually. It's something else.
It is the posture of the poets, though. And I would say that it is at some level Christian as well, right? That there are things that we as Christians have in common with Homer and the Greek tragedy writers,
right,
like Sophocles and Aeschylus and Euripides, more sometimes than we have with guys like Plato and Aristotle and the Stoa, simply because
and you had a Virgil point too here, didn't you?
Yeah, and Virgil, because what poets do when they're doing their jobs well, what those, like the survivals of these guys show us, is a reflection of this reality, right? That a philosopher like Boethius will say, yeah, you need to align your real self with reality. And so then Homer, who's not trying to come up with a metaphysical system devoid of divine revelation the way Epicurus is, Homer can reflect to you the reality of what is actual good, what is actual happiness, and that more effectively than someone like Epicurus, who without the light of divine aid is going to falter. So does Homer falter, of course. But Homer, therefore, in his representations of human relationships, actually can show this sort of the questions of natural revelation, that we do know that the bond of husband and wife is that strong, right? And we're talking about a world where probably that, we don't have all of the Odysseus backstory, but I'm pretty sure arranged marriage is what you're doing in Mycenaean and Homeric Greece, right? It's not like they dated for a few years off and on and there were other hot Greek boys at the dances that Penelope, right? There are love matches in the ancient world, or people do fall in love even before their arranged marriage goes. Well, or they fall in love with the person after the arranged marriage.
Helen, that worked out well.
After all, I forgot the greatest love match of them all, folks.
Nothing negative happened after.
No, nothing bad.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Homer and the tragedians go for, that I feel like I read it, if it wasn't in Boethius, it was in something else I'm reading right now, which is mostly St. Augustine or Irish people.
Same thing.
That you go, I mean, yeah, the Irish are way more Augustinian.
I think Patrick actually might be. Wait,
Patrick is...
Has to be, right?
I mean, he's Augustinian.
Yeah.
But it's this, the idea that you just go through the suffering, right? And that is actually where happiness is found. It's not by avoiding the pain, but basically finding, well, I would say, I can't remember the exact quote, but basically you find God there. You don't run away from it, right? It's going to come at you. And it's an unavoidable aspect of human existence. And this is something that we find in all of the great poets. And it is something that Christians are able to meditate on and see where divine providence is hitting us there.
See, this is so what you're saying, I think, if I were to kind of put the dumb guy version on it, is look, everybody sins and there are effects to sin. But against our good wishes and God's grace and according to our nature, there are glimmers of truth everywhere. So when someone desires happiness, that's a good desire for them to have. They may pursue it in things that are not good. When they, sometimes when Homer talks with the Greek gods, like the gods of war or joy or feasting or like I think Zeus is the god of the hearth, right? So like, or hospitality at least. And, hospitality is actually good. It's not a bad thing, but there's a natural desire or observation that you want hospitality. Odysseus is frequently hoping for hospitality and worried about the contrary. And all of us would know that he's distinguished between a good and a evil very accurately, because a pirate is inhospitable, whereas being invited to someone's hearth is hospitable. So there are these sense in which these yearnings are true and good, and they can teach us something. And because most of life is in Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, in this sort of wisdom that we have to live in, we need those examples. We need to be able to articulate what the things are that we experience in life. Because the Bible doesn't aim to name every possible true thing, but to name the true things that we need to know for our life and godliness. So there'll be some things that you encounter in life that you need to be able to name that I think the poets can actually help you to. It's the difference between, if I were to put it maybe starkly, Christian nihilism and a more authentic Christianity. Christian nihilism is the form of Christianity that says anything that is life is hateful and bad, and I hope it all dies and I just go to heaven. And if anything that's not Christian, therefore is the worst. Where I think a more balanced Christianity recognizes that due to sin and depravity, everything is spoiled and corrupt, but the yearnings for good objects are true, and they can still teach you things. So, I mean, obviously John Calvin will talk about how the Spirit in a general way inspires virtues among the pagans. Augustine will talk about the light of nature still shining through. Herman Bavinck will talk about it under the name of common grace. Whatever language you want to use, you need to be able to affirm that there is something in life that, like Paul says, is in First Timothy 4, everything God created is good. Still is, by nature, not necessarily by choice, which is the corruption of the good. So I think, I know that I'm kind of going on and on about this, but I think we need to really be careful that we don't become Christian nihilists, or we would never read a book like Boethius. And if we didn't read a book like Boethius, as John Calvin says, we would we'd pay the punishment for our sloth.
I'd like to pay the punishment for our sloth.
You mentioned something about... Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and you, before we were talking, or recording, we were still talking, you said...
True.
Something about C.S. Lewis, his idea that Christianity is basically the fulfillment of all the pagan longings.
Yeah, he has this... I'm not... it's more like rough in my brain, but yeah, he has this idea, like, I think even in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, doesn't he have Bacchus walking around in it?
He's in Prince Caspian.
Prince Caspian then. And there's
Father
a sense
Christmas instead.
And Father Christmas, okay, yeah, but there's this, yeah, so there are these ideas that it also depends on how you view Homer's gods, if he's being literal or if they're actually kind of like allegories of reality.
And if you're a late antique Platonist of the era of Boethius, you believe they're allegories.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't realize that was the comment at this time, and what that would mean is, you're not actually reading Homer as if he's just like some simplistic, like, the gods do X, Y, and Z, which, by the way, reading Homer, there's probably no way to... He's not a literalist. It can't be. Like, he's describing all these scenes in, like, the realm of the gods that he was never there. Like,
Right.
but there is something to him probably allegorized. I mean, you have to, if you think of, like, Poseidon is the god of earthquakes and waves, and Zeus is the god of hospitality. It's like, and hospitality is a key theme in the book. There is a real sense in which the gods are extracted from the goods of life, or the powers, you might say more accurately, because it's not necessarily good to have earthquakes, but there's a power behind that. All that to say, there are these yearnings, observations in the pagans that are true yearnings for real goods. Their pursuit of those goods are corrupted by their evil choice. They all eat that pear for no reason.
Right. Yes. And it's worth saying, I mean, I know you and Ian talked about this in your Thomas Aquinas episodes, but that whatever goods and truths the pagans are ever going to get to, it is only by the grace of God and Jesus Christ that any true good is ultimately found in them. That it's not saving knowledge of the truth without Jesus. It's just, small truths.
Yeah, and there's all the different, like the Bovinkian common grace, but even Maximos, or Maximus, whichever you prefer. I like Maximos. It makes me feel cool. Talks about all the logia of nature. What's the Erasmians? Logoi? But the logia of nature.
Logoi would be Erasmians, but I think logia would probably be what Maximus would say.
I agree, and it also sounds way cooler to say logia.
You should find... So, I warn this to the listeners, if you go find Maximos Konstas, talking about Maximos the Confessor, he is Greek Orthodox, but he's a good interpreter of the text, he's also the translator. And so it's fun to listen to him talk. It's fun because he is perfectly fluent in modern Greek. And so it's fun to listen to him say everybody's names and say all of the Greek terms, because it does not sound like what you would hear out of I, who was trained to do Greek in a sort of
the Erasmian pronunciation, if memory serves, is sort of artificial for pedagogic reasons, but the classical Greek, I think, actually sounds better, but probably because it was a spoken language. So the logi, anyway, the logi are these sort of ideas that emanate from God, the stable truths of reality, justice, etc. And all of us then, to a degree, participate by knowledge, can participate in reality, the logi, and we find we might say logos, our calling, and how we participate in those things. But all that to say, there's access to the real world, and we're going to get that, I think by the time we get to book 4, it's all about the good. I can't remember, book 3, whatever it is, 3, 4, and you're going to find one of the most beautiful things in life is that reality is accessible. You can know the truth. It's not just everything is subjective vibes. There's objective justice, truth, God, love, etc. And you can then know it and align your internal life with it, so you make true judgments, so that when fortune comes and takes away something changeable, you already knew it wasn't where your ultimate happiness was found, because it was changeable and losable. You've already, you might say, you placed your happiness in something that cannot rust and moth cannot destroy. Something eternal. We might call it a city.
Eternal.
A city of
God.
Even.
Yes. And which is exactly what philosophy is saying to Boethius, right? If happiness is the highest good of a rational creature, that cannot be the highest good which can in any way be taken away. And we know, and Boethius gets there, ultimately, spoiler alert, that's God.
Spoiler alert.
So,
God.
That's coming up in book 3.
That which cannot be lost is the only thing that can give you unlosable happiness. Everything else, family, friends, books. I must be careful about books here, actually. But everything but books are God.
But actually, that's actually part of what philosophy says to in book 1. Right?
He actually does.
He's like, man, I'm stuck in Pavia. My library's not here. Where are all my books? And philosophy's like, bro, no, you don't need the books to be happy.
Well, at least audiobooks, right?
Yeah, Boethius with his earbuds.
Actually, that's Lady Wisdom is an audiobook for her. Yeah.
Oh, she's the audiobook. She's the elucidation, yeah.
I think it was to bring it to a close. You brought it up, but do you want to touch on poem section 8 for the poem section 8 of book 2? It's kind of there's some kind of cool lines in here about Providence and love that is very unstoical.
It's very unstoical, and I think it's super important. Yeah, so poem verse 8, it's on page 227 in the Loeb edition. I'm just going to read the whole thing, and I'll pause at sort of the things that are jumping out at me. So we have, in regular harmony, the world moves through its changes. Seeds in competition with each other are held in balance by eternal law. I'd like to say these first few lines are actually they're matching to what Boethius himself actually said earlier about divine providence in book 1, in one of the verse that he says.
It's also really cool in Latin. It's stabili fide. It's like the stability kind of stuck out to me there a little bit. The more literal word.
And there's something about faithfulness with fide there. And Phoebus brings rosy dawns in his golden chariot. So there you go, Wyatt, with your reading of Homer right now. Rosy-fingered dawn, every other page of the Odyssey.
Oh, and Phoebus brings it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Phoebus.
Phoebus Apollo. So Phoebus brings rosy dawns in his golden chariot that his sister Phoebe, which would be Artemis, Diana, I think is her Roman name, may rule the nights that Hesperus brings. The waves of the greedy sea are kept within fixed bounds, nor may the land move out and extend its... So he's just talking about how everything has its limit, its bound, its place, its boundaries, where you've got the land, you've got the sea, the shore, you've got day, and you've got night. You have the gods, who Boethius is a Christian. He's not the only Christian to write this kind of poetry in sort of the 5th and 6th century, where you're using the pagan gods, and they're clearly allegories for natural realities.
Right, yeah.
So he's not some sort of weird Trinitarian polytheist, which one could actually imagine, but is not a thing I know ever to have existed.
Maybe Michael Heiser.
Maybe. I think sometimes in his imagination C.S. Lewis, but not in reality, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it could be.
He's like, I'd like to imagine that world. I know it's not the one I live in. That mythology is lies breathed through silver. So, and continuing on, what binds... So we've got all of this order, right? This is what he's lauding, he's extolling. So if you're into theology of law and justice, and I'm into canon law, so this kind of thing gets me excited.
Cannons.
Right? We love canon law into theology.
Right. Fire the artillery. You're in the Lord's army.
That's it. That's the kind of cannons we're here for.
That's what I was thinking about. 2 ends.
But what binds all things to order, governing earth and sea and sky, is love. Amor. And so that's what always grasps my imagination when I get to here, is this idea of love. And the love is the thing that is bringing order, though, right? And so this is a Christian, it's vaguely Platonic as well. So amor here would be in Greek eros, which if you've read Plato's Symposium, is like the main theme, what is true eros? And in the end, eros is only to be found, according to the teaching that Diotima gives to Socrates, that he gives to the buddies around the table as recorded by Plato. So what Plato says, really, you have to embed it that many times, is that true love is really seeking the best, the truest, the most good, seeking the kaliston. And so then, and that's true eros, that's true love, right? So it's not, which is a contradistinction to the kind of love that most of us, including Plato's contemporaries in the Greek world, talk about. Like if you start talking to your pagan, unbelieving friends on the street when they think about love, they're often thinking about sex, right? Or thinking about natural affection to a buddy, to a friend. But this is a thing that is actually a thing that is disordered in human experience. It is not a thing that governs the universe in any meaningful way. It is a thing that Euripides, there's a whole speech in his Hippolytus all about how love is like basically the absolute worst. That love drives you to do all sorts of insane, stupid things. And so the character Hippolytus, he completely rejects love. And that actually gets him killed in the end because of his hubris. But that's how people have often felt experience of love. But what we're saying is, I would say specifically in a Christian mode, no, love, amor, is the fierce, powerful force that holds the universe together. It's more than just warm thoughts on a cold night. It is the thing that binds everything together. And he continues, he says, if love's reign slackened, all things now held by mutual love at once would fall to warring with each other, striving to wreck that engine of the world which now they drive in mutual trust with motion beautiful. And so this actually is the vision. This is the vision of the cosmos. It's found elsewhere here in Boethius in the Consolation. This is the late antique medieval universe where everything is held together by love as this attractional force that binds things one to another. It's what is in Dante if you ascend up to paradise. Love is the driving force behind what enables the primum mobile, which is the the first moving thing, which is a terrible translation. That
Sounds
is
beautiful.
in sort of the paradise, the paradiso, around which the spheres of the universe are enabled to move. And essentially, it is love that makes the entire universe move, right?
Well, and love would be sort of according to will. What one piece that sorry, just as I was kind of looking at the Latin side as you're going. So you have amor and amat, and then it's really interesting that you have what I guess is translated as mutual love. It's socia fide, but it reminds me of the fide from in the very first line, and so you have faith and love highlighted and repeated as like the universe is ordered in faith and love. There's just something interesting in my brain. I know that he doesn't mean it literally like faith because it's the root doesn't actually mean that's what he's aiming to communicate. But I just wonder if there's a bit of intentionality there because he's a pretty legit Christian. So like I kind of maybe read into the Latin word choice, fide twice and amor. And I don't think he talks about hope, but that would kind of make it more.
That would be great if there was a bit of space along with our fides and our amor.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a... Yeah, because faithfulness, right? Trustworthiness of the universe.
Right.
These are things, which are in fides as well as in pistis, for those who were getting into those debates.
Well, I mean, I think that it's pretty clear that stability, faithfulness, all that kind of language is the kind of, like, it's pretty clear that the world, stability fide, it's this sturdiness to it, is really important.
Yeah. And just, sorry, there's the sturdiness of it. And so then if you think of the socia fide in line 19, there's a mutuality in the faithfulness of the universe as well. That it's not just, because when you're doing relationships between, persons, he's sort of personifying all the stuff, right? If you're doing relationships between persons, you need to actually have two trustworthy persons in order for the faith to be really successful in getting something done, right? Like, I have a day job in sales. Occasionally things go wrong with an order, and I can tell if a customer has lost faith in me, they don't necessarily want to buy. They start checking in, like, way too frequently for my liking for me to be able to give them solid answers, right? Like, if something has gone wrong, there is a lack of faithfulness, lack of trust, and you need to rebuild that in a human relationship in order for your relationship to continue. And so you have to have socia fide. You need to, socia fides, to put it in the nominative.
I didn't think about that. And all at once would follow the warring with each other, obviously, because there would be turmoil if there wasn't that mutual faithfulness.
Yeah.
In mutual trust with motion beautiful, he says it, I guess, again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's ad quam nunc socia fide pulchris motibus incitant. So now, with beautiful motions. And love joins peoples too by a sacred bond. So he's talking about how amor is for the universe, it's also for us, right? And because the human person is a microcosm.
Pulchris is beautiful, okay. Sorry, I was still looking at this. I'm not as able as you are, so it takes me like an extra minute to understand it.
Well, sorry, I just...
No, you're good. I'm just slow. It's not a bad thing.
Well, it's good for the listeners then to have, to not necessarily gallop on the way sometimes I do.
No, you're good. I like the word, they've got Felix the cat down here too.
Felix the cat, he's here.
So Felix hominum.
Because love joins people too by a sacred bond, and ties the knot of holy matrimony that binds chaste lovers. Just a pause here. Chaste lovers doesn't mean celibate lovers. This is like chastity in the context of marriage means you are faithful to your spouse. Doesn't mean you forego sexual union. That's just... So, which is worth noting if you're reading Augustine, because he does talk about chaste couples. He doesn't actually mean celibate couples. There are times when he talks about them as well, but there are times when he talks about a chaste husband, he means a husband who isn't doing what many Roman husbands do, which is, as you may guess. Chaste lovers joins too with its law all faithful comrades. I like the idea that there's a law of love, right? That binds us together. Yeah. Oh, happy race of men, if the love that rules the stars may also rule in your hearts, right? This thing that binds them together so they're able to work in perfect harmony. This is one of the things that ancient people love, looking at the sky, looking at the stars, is that there's a regularity and an order to it. You can predict where the stars are going to be, because the stars throughout the course of the year, we're not as good at it if we're not astronomers or astronomy aficionados because of electric lights. But ancient people were not that bad at looking at the sky with the naked eye, and you can tell at different times of the year, the constellations are in different positions in the sky, and that is entirely predictable. And what is interesting is that the planets move in a different sequence from the rest in the relation to the constellations, which is so they figured something, the planets are different, and so must be operating on a different sphere of reality from the stars. So the stars are the farthest out, and the planets are closer and closer to Earth because they move differently from the stars.
But
in the night
interestingly,
sky.
then the Isaac Newton's. Anyways, go. But yes.
But yeah, so they're doing that. And so the regularity of the movement of the stars is evidence of the regularity of the divine providence ordering the universe. And so then that love, which is the binding force that underlies sort of Platonic physics, if only something that good were ordering our human relationships as well. If only we actually had that same love ourselves, one to another, where you're not breaking contract with someone, where your faithfulness, the faithfulness of a salesperson to his customers was never in doubt. Right.
Huh.
And obviously there are bigger contracts in the world than selling people t-shirts for a living, but
Wow, I didn't. Yeah, thanks for. I didn't want to connect to that, but that actually makes a lot of sense, and it is pretty interesting too. Just at a more like sort of individual level, I'm thinking with Boethius is that if this love that binds the universe, there's this capability that can rule your heart, your animus, and that'll be important to him later when you're aligning your inner life to the exterior world. I guess that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Your inner heart, your inner life. It's not about vibes and feelings alone. It's about aligning yourself to the real order of things, which is important. Well, I feel like we kind of covered that chapter to a degree. Do you have any final comment, or do you think we can finish here until next week? And actually, I'm very excited for next time because it's on how all these various goods in life can never satisfy, whether that's pleasure or wealth or power or the fourth thing. It's prestige.
Pleasure.
I think.
Prestige, yeah, the gloria.
Gloria. And those, I think, are the same temptations we all have today for seeking happiness in the thing that actually can't make you happy. And then we end up sort of burnt out or unsatisfied in life and we don't know why. I think it's a brilliant chapter. And I know that the tradition that he's drawing on is it's not just that Boethius made these categories up, but they are, I think, excessively true about like they're naturally true about all humans, and they're just as true then as they are today.
Absolutely. It'll be good.
Is that good, mein Freund? Finn.
Ja.